Kia ora. I'm getting a lot of signals that it is time to go, and I wasn't sure if they were fake or real. They are real. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming tonight to our Greenpeace live show. This is Greenpeace Live. Normally we are live on the internet, and tonight we are live on the internet. Hello and welcome to our viewers, and live in Whammy Bar in Auckland. My name's Niamh O'Flynn. I'm the Programme Director at Greenpeace Aotearoa, so I will be your host and conversation wrangler for the evening if these people behave themselves. I am joined by Russel Norman, who's the Executive Director of Greenpeace Aotearoa. Welcome, Russel. Lovely to have you turn up. Amanda Larsson, who is head of our agriculture campaigns at Greenpeace, and Mike Smith, who, when I was just speaking to him before, asked me to call him a climate strategist from Northland, but he is also a very esteemed, long-standing activist who I'm sure many of you know and have seen his work over many, many years, and I don't think we can just say climate strategist. We're going to be talking about the government's war on nature. A year on, the four of us had this discussion just after the election last year, and we talked about kind of our reckons for where this government would lead us, where this government would lead nature, and how it might go down based on what happened in the election. And we're now more than a year on from that, so kind of looking at what has happened since then and what we're going to do about it. So, off we go. Just to warm us up. In one word, who shall be first? Amanda, tell us, in one word, 2024. Sum it up for us.
Relentless.
Okay, Mike?
I'll tell you, it was binary.
Binary, good one. Russell?
Challenging.
Okay, why? In any order.
Go, Amanda.
It's just been full on. It's just been one thing after another after another. It feels like fighting fires. Yeah.
For me, the binary element has been, on one hand, we've had this neoliberal agenda, political agenda, which has been really regressive. Things have been going backwards. It's a real concern. And the other part of the binary aspect is that it's triggered, lots of activations and mobilisations. A lot of the good people here would have taken part in the war against nature, hikoi, and lots of other good stuff that's come out of that. So it's been a game of two halves, I'd say.
I reckon it's been challenging because the evidence just mounts about the climate biodiversity crisis, and at the same time you've got this New Zealand government who's just making it all worse, and then globally, you've got the rise of fascism and the far right. It's this incredibly challenging moment where you've got this disjunct in your head between the evidence about what's going on and then the political reality, which has been had all these right-wing forces which have been making it worse.
Nice. Speaking of right-wing forces, Russell, this is a party trick we wheel you out for sometimes. Can you give us a 1 minute, or as close to 1 minute as you can, maybe 5 minutes, rundown on what exactly is Luxon's war on nature? What has the government done in the last 14 months?
Sure, there's a stack to it, so just to pick a few of them. So, I think if you wanted to pick, I reckon one iconic thing, it's the fast-track approval of seabed mining, which is blocking offshore wind generation. If you were to pick, just one project that typifies the problem, here we need lots more renewable electricity generation in order to decarbonise the New Zealand economy. And instead of being able to explore the possibility of offshore wind, we've got seabed mining, or they're trying to fast-track seabed mining. There's all the other fast-track projects, so they've got irrigation projects, they're fast-tracking coal mines, gold mines, or you name it, irrigation projects in the South Island. At the same time, in transport, it's just, they've literally stopped funding new cycleways, which is just bonkers. You've got the faster speeds, more deaths policy from Simeon Brown when he was the Minister for killing more people on the roads. And sadly, we've already seen the results of that in the Wairarapa, where they tried to reduce the speed limits. They were blocked by the government, and now someone's been killed in that exact spot. And now he's moved on to health, where his policy is less funding, more deaths. And so I think we'll see similar results there. And then in terms of, the other climate policies, they're trying to restart oil and gas exploration, which is truly crazy in the middle of a climate crisis. They've literally removed the consideration of climate change when they make transport funding decisions. And so that they actually have removed the requirement to consider climate change. And of course, they've increased funding for more motorways. They've cut funding for public transport and walking and cycling, but particularly in public transport space. And then you look at the biodiversity space, you've got this craziness, which is that like you're allowed to kill as many seals as you want. There used to be limits on how many seals you could kill when you were fishing. And so they've relaxed the rules around protecting biodiversity in the fishing space and pretty much everything else. So you could go on and on and on and on. There's a massive list of things that they've started and are trying to do. They're up against it, so there's a lot of opposition, but they have a very long policy agenda. I was arguing with Chris Bishop just a few days ago where he was kind of denying that they have an anti-environment agenda. But when you list it out, it's really long. And we know now, because we engaged with Larsson and Bishop at the beginning about the fast-track legislation, and we said to them at the time, look, you've got to include environment in the purposes clause of the fast-track legislation. And we know that now that Ministry for the Environment officials were saying exactly the same thing to Chris Bishop because it's come out under the OAA. And Chris Bishop deliberately made the decision not to have anything about the environment in the purposes clause of the fast-track legislation, which makes it very difficult for these expert panels to decline anything on environmental grounds. So it's going to really rely on massive community opposition in order to stop some of these really destructive projects from making their way forward.
Whew. We will get positive a little bit later, but we're not there yet. Mike, this question's for you. I guess we're seeing, so many crises from this government, and it's not just an attack on nature, it's an attack on Te Tiriti and Te Ao Māori that kind of coincides with this war on nature. Can you give a bit of a rundown about that?
Yeah, how it looks for a lot of our people is that the this current government's agenda is pulling down the palisades that have been erected to protect us as a people, and as they pull down the palisades, I think the question is, who's coming through? Who is behind that agenda, and they're kind of pouring through the breaches. So we're wanting to shift the narrative, not so much away from the work of the politicians to erode the protections. We need to focus on that, but we also have to have an eye on who's coming through, the extractive industries that will benefit, and what's their agenda and what's their activities. Because what we've found in the past is we're more likely to be able to stop those industries in place than we are to change government policy at this time. They're committed to it. So we can march down to Wellington. It's not going to stop it. We can write submissions and spend 10 minutes in front of select committees. It's not going to stop what's happening. But if we take action, direct action against those companies, when they arrive in our regions, we can stop them. And so that we've got to just be expedient about how we use our energy. We've got to have very clear objectives, I believe, regionally and nationally. Then we've got to have clear strategies to achieve those objectives. And then we've got to have a clear raft of tactics to power those strategies. So I think what we need to do at the moment is to get that type of strategic thinking, planning integrated around the regions so that we're having national effect in doing that. And that's going to be what we're up to this year. Niamh?
Awesome. We are going to get into some details on that, and I think there are going to be some questions. Amanda, you spent a lot of time thinking and analysing politics. The Larsson government and Larsson, is this a deliberate plan? Is there some big agenda going on, or what's happening with this kind of war on nature and war on all things good in Aotearoa?
Outed me as a politics nerd. I think it's pretty well established that there is no rhyme or reason behind what's going on at the moment. I mean, I think both the sort of media commentary and the polls, I think, have established that people don't really have faith that this government knows what they're up to. I think there's a few examples that are quite clear on that. So Russel already mentioned the fast track. And, you could have a strategy for infrastructure that's required in this country and thinking about the future and planning for the needs of future generations, and then have a plan around how to build all that infrastructure. But that's not what the fast track is. The fast track is just this random grab bag of projects that are plucked from the wish lists of lobbyists who we know have been really influential with this government, And the whole fast track process is kind of removing barriers to basically corporate exploitation of nature. And I mean, Te Tiriti as well is one of the most effective brakes on the exploitation of nature in communities, and that's under attack as well. So I think it's quite clear that there isn't really a plan. It's more just kind of like the interests of big money are having an influence. I guess the other side of it is thinking about what's been announced quite recently, which is this, apparently the growth agenda is all about more tourism, digital nomads, etc. But when you think about the foundations of the tourism industry in Aotearoa, it's the natural environment, it's Māori culture and language. All you have to do is look at an Air New Zealand in-flight video or show up at the airport and see all the signage that's welcoming you into the country and know that that's what tourism is built on in this country. And that is all under attack as well. So it's not a long-term sensible plan. It's partly the influence of corporate lobbyists, but it's partly also just, I think, Christopher Luxon and Nicola Willis kind of grasping at straws, desperately trying to do something in response to the polls which show that confidence in their ability to manage the economy is dropping. And to inject some hope into the conversation, I think it's really positive to see that people aren't being duped by the growth mantra. I think people can see through that thin veil, and we're seeing that as well in terms of increased interest in getting involved in activism. So that's really positive in spite of that feeling like quite a tragic report card for the government.
Gross. Russell said I wasn't
everything
funny.
Everything must go. Everything must go. Oh no, everyone must go. That's their immigration policy, right? Everyone must go.
Russell, you were speaking to the man himself last week. Tell us a little bit about Luxon. What did he have to say for himself?
Well, look, it's the thing is that they really, it's just what Amanda said. They don't really know what to do, right? So they kind of had this, they took, those governing parties took $500,000 in donations from all those fast-track projects. So the National Party, the ACT Party, New Zealand First took all of those campaign donations. Those projects are now getting pushed through, but it's like, well, but where is the rhyme nor reason for it, right? I agree, it's such a grab of policies. But when you look at their fiscal policy, so government spending, in the middle of a recession they should be actually building the infrastructure that you need. Like, we've got a whole building industry that's basically lots of builders who don't have enough work. We should be building more houses. And Kaingaora has just been told not to build new houses. So they're maintaining the housing stock at a static level when we've got this exact moment when we should be building houses. Likewise, big infrastructure projects to protect us from climate change, and they're not being built. So I think they've got themselves into a real pickle where their fiscal policy is ludicrous in the middle of a recession, and now they're just desperately grasping at straws. And I think the everyone must go campaign for tourism is just such a desperate and shallow thing. I don't know if you've seen the ads, but it's like a Briscoe ad, right? It's the pure 100% pure New Zealand ad with just these big kind of stamps on it that say everyone must go, even you. And that is the new tourism policy, the advertising campaign in Australia. They're just lost and don't know what to do because they've just got this kind of very narrow agenda. And it's not producing the outcome that they expected. In fact, it's produced, a serious recession. There's high unemployment. In spite of the constant attacks on the environment, it's not resulting in this booming rock star economy that they were hoping. So they're lost.
I totally agree with what Russell's saying in terms of the economic. They don't seem to have a coherent economic plan, and it's still that really brain dead exploit the primary produce. And shift the dials away from public ownership to privatisation seems to be one of the objectives. But our concern too is that they're playing a long game, and that this current crop of politicians know that they'll be bounced out the door sooner or later. But in opening up our natural environment to mining, for example, they'll be locking in 40-year contracts. So it doesn't matter. The issue will transcend the political levers that currently empower them. But once they're locked in, it doesn't matter if the government changes. They've got long-term contracts. So that's why it's imperative that we as communities stop them before they start digging in. Once they dig in, once they get established, they'll be here for the long term. And so it's even more crucial what we do over the next 12 months to hold the line to, as they attempt to come through the gaps in the fences, we've got to make sure that they don't. And we only need to mount that defence for a certain, for a limited period of time. And then once the politics readjust again, I think that we would have done our community a great service by holding them back. So I think we just need to really commit to direct action against the extractive industries as they appear on our horizons. And it's not going to be, it doesn't need to be long term for us. I think if we just give it heaps over the next 12, 18 months, that'll probably go a long way to holding them back.
Just to pick up on your point about shepherding the next thing in, I mean, we've seen many successive governments who do not prioritise protecting nature and protecting the environment, and I guess the kind of serious kind of full noise attack on nature is pretty unprecedented under this government. But what do you think we need to see from the opposition to feel confident that the nature will be protected in the next election? Open to any of you.
Well, I think there needs to be some agreement leading into the election rather than all the parties canvass, and try and get votes for their individual parties and then work it out after the election. I'd like to see our opposition parties get together prior to the election and iron out some bottom lines that they campaign on and that we can have some confidence in, and that we can hold their feet to the fire after the election. Because what we see in politics in New Zealand is a lot of smiling faces, from politicians leading up to the election, and then after the election it all gets slitty-eyed. And so, so I think that's the, you know what I mean, by the mean look. And so what we need to do is to get them to commit to objectives prior to the election. One of the things I'd like to see, and also look at what are the constitutional benchmarks that we need to establish. What are the things that makes up the character of New Zealand that goes beyond the impact of the venal party politics that plays out. So we need to elevate a lot of things, and I think nature is one of those things. I think a lot of our human rights, indigenous rights, need to be elevated above the swamp of politics, and they need to be crystallised and protected at a constitutional level. So we're not consistently having to, to deal with the changing goalposts of our swings, the political pendulum, how it swings. In 1 minute you're going this way, and next minute they're undoing that and going that way, and then it's just backwards and forwards. And so we need to just take some of the core issues out of that process and elevate them to, and put them beyond that political process.
All right. Well, I reckon the government, this is a really extreme government. So we worked, when I was in Parliament, we worked with John Key. We did this $400 million home insulation scheme. It was fantastic. That was after the GFC. We needed fiscal stimulus. We did the bike project. We did the National Cycleway. So there's nothing inherent, I don't think, about the National Party that says it has to be an extremist anti-nature party as it is currently in this government, right? And not that I've agreed with lots of things that National Party's done, but it hasn't all been bad. And there's been various times in the past where they've done good things. So this is really an aberration, what we're dealing with at the moment. It's kind of like if you think about the neoliberal revolution that happened, it came through and then it was brought to a halt back in 1996, 99. And to some extent we rolled it back. But this government is now really trying to restart the neoliberal revolution in this country, right? And that is the extremist position that we're dealing with. And in dealing with that, what I believe the opposition needs to do is they need to have a bit of mongrel, right? This is an extreme government. They need to fight hard back at them with everything they've got, because this needs to be confronted. This is not the time for politeness. This is, we're going to do our non-violent direct action. There'll be lots of people out there who fight, all the people marching in the streets, in the hikoi around the Treaty Principles Bill, as well as the March for Nature. So there's, lots of us are going to fight and put ourselves on the line about this thing. Niamh, you just got arrested at the Stratera thing or whatever, at the Stratera action, and And Amanda, you were climbing the Fonterra building, the factory. I mean, we need the politicians to also put themselves on the line. This is not a time for being nice and polite. This is a time for calling out this extremist government, and that's what we need from the politicians in Parliament right now.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yep. Want to add anything?
I was just going to add, I think what we haven't seen from the opposition is the kind of visionary alternative that feels realistic. And I guess what this government is trying to convince people is that you can't have it all. They're trying to say, well, if you want economic growth, you have to destroy the environment. It's one or the other. And I think that's a narrative that, despite being factually false, I think resonates with a lot of people because it's so ingrained in our kind of culture. And I think what the opposition needs to present is, what is the alternative to that? And one thing we recently launched a petition as a global network about taxing billionaires. So at the same time as there's a climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, there's also a huge increase in inequality with tons and tons of billionaires who are massive polluters flying around in their private jets and with obscene amounts of wealth. And another way, to do this right is to fund the transition by taxing people who are obscenely wealthy and paying for adaptation and mitigation and a better future for everyone. But I feel like that's such a, I don't know, I haven't seen the kind of courage in the opposition to broach that yet. So let's hope that through our campaigning, as a movement, that we can empower them with the courage to give us an alternative vision.
Yeah, people need to tell Chippy to adopt the wealth tax. That's wherever you can. Sorry, what was that?
Can you be clear who you mean by the opposition? I think you're meaning Labour because the Green Party lobbied, campaigned very strongly on tax the rich at the last election. And if we look at strong action in Parliament, we're looking at Pāti Māori and the Green Party. So let's be clear who we mean by the opposition, please.
Just for anyone on the live stream, there was a question around when we're talking about the opposition, are we talking about Labour or are we including the Greens and Pāti Māori in that, with the note that the Green Party did campaign for a wealth tax in there. And to pick up on that point, I think what we're asking for is for all parties to make environment an election issue, because that didn't happen from anyone last election, actually. So what we really need to do is see the environment prioritised as an election issue this time. And to pick up on your point, Amanda, about campaigning for an alternative future that's possible. Possible doesn't have to mean unambitious. And I think often when we're talking about possible, it's like, oh, well, in the next year or so we could make this happen. And that's not the kind of ambitious thinking we need in the middle of a crisis for humanity. Okay, I'm going to move us on to talk a little bit about Mike. You've recently had a huge campaign success. Congratulations. I'm going to let you tell everybody about the Australian mining company that you just stopped up north. Can you tell us a bit about it?
As part of the acceleration of extractive industries pouring into Aotearoa, some of them likely to be fast-tracked, the Australian company Mineralogy came into our region and started exploring and prospecting for minerals in our region of Whangaroa in the far north. And so over the last 18 months, 2 years, we've been organising locally, developing organisation, opposition on the ground amongst our various communities. We've got 4 hapu communities around our region. So we've had meetings, talk about what it is, what's wrong with it, why we need to oppose it, how we can oppose it, and just to develop that level of, I guess, commitment and to taking direct action when they turn up. And so I've had numerous meetings. We've started to do training, the usual things that you do, blockades and land occupations and that sort of thing. And
I don't know if that's usual for everybody.
That's for us. And and so we just found out a couple of weeks ago that Mineralogy has relinquished their permits, and they've pulled out of 12 permits. And so I think that's a testament to, the power of public opinion, removing of social licence for these types of activities. And we've seen that happen in the past. You know, the time I spent with Greenpeace campaigning on deep sea oil drilling, we achieved the same sort of result. And I think we've now developed a bit of a reputation around those types of industries, those types of sectors, that this is tiger country. You know, you're just not going to walk in and have their way with us. You know, we will resist. And that resistance will be long. You know, we're capable of maintaining that over, you know, I think the oil campaign was a decade, you know. And so we've got to commit to sort of reasonably long-term action, but to not be despondent. You know, we overturned, with Greenpeace and others, many members of the community, we beat back, it was about 10 or 12 oil majors, international oil companies, some of the most powerful groups on the planet. And we booted the whole lot of them out of our country, so it can be done. And how it's done is by communities working together, having good plans, having good strategies, good tactics, but basically rising to the challenge, you know, not being defeatist, not giving up. Because what I'd also say about this neoliberal agenda is, we've seen this before, you know, like when Don Brash and the ACT Party back in 2004, they wanted to fast track oil drilling. They wanted to get rid of environmental laws and the pesky tangata whenua out of the way back then with the foreshore and seabed deal. They played the race card and they used their kind of agitating groups, the white supremacist groups, to kind of to do the fear mongering that Māori people were coming down over the hills to take everything off everybody, and they scared the population who were vulnerable to that type of fear. And but it's exactly the same thing by the same party that they're doing 20 years later here. And it's but you know, we overcame that then. Don Brash, you know, he had his little moment in the sun, then he disappeared, floated off back out to sea again, and so all things must pass, but they will pass, and they won't cement themselves into our economy or into our culture as a people if we actively prevent them from, and these ideas and these industries from taking root within our society. If we're just complacent and we don't do anything about it, you know, they will get their roots into us, but we can, as a society, as New Zealand people all together, we can withstand these attacks.
Yeah, and thanks for taking us back, because I think a lot of people in the room might not remember that time, and it all feels new and hard and scary, and so it is good to remember that people have fought these fights before us and continue to fight them, and we're doing it again.
Yeah, and also like just how much like positive we've done, right? Every time, like you think about the City Rail Link in Auckland, right? They can't undo that project, right? That is a massive transformational public transport project. It's the biggest infrastructure project in the country. It cannot be filled back in with concrete. As much as Simeon Brown may wish to, it's too late. And every time we build a cycleway, they can't put it back. Every solar plant that gets built, they cannot smash them up. Every time someone chooses to solarise their own home or their business, they can't go in and rip them off, right? So in spite of what they would like to do with this neoliberal backwards revolution to take us back to an insane 1950s industrial craziness, our society is going forward, right? Now, obviously they're causing harm and damage, but there are all of these projects and things that people are doing that simply are impossible for the neoliberal revolution to turn back. And I think we need to celebrate every one of them. Every cycleway is a victory. And they're not going to build any more, that's true. Well, we've got this ridiculous government in, but come the next one, we'll build a whole bunch more protected cycleways, and it's incredibly hard to rip them up once you put them in. Even all those raised pedestrian crossings, I celebrate every one as I go over it. Because it's like Simeon would like to rip those all up, right? That is the government policy. They hate them, right? But every one of those slows down traffic, makes our cities more livable, makes it safer for my kids to walk to school. So all of those things, we need to celebrate our victories because we are making the place better in spite of the opposition we face.
And I think that's something we talk a lot about internally as Greenpeace with each other often, is like, it feels like a bloody miracle that we win sometimes, right? When we're up against the biggest corporations in the world and the biggest industries and the biggest lobbyists and all of this money and all of this power, and we still win sometimes. And every win takes us a step forward, and it's kind of miraculous, really, that people power can do that. I'm going to talk about the oil campaign a little bit more, so thanks, Mike, for taking us there. Amanda, I think everyone here was involved in the oil campaign, so please feel free to chip in. But can you tell us a little bit about the win to stop offshore oil and gas, and then where we're at now in that campaign? And feel free to chip in, Russel and Mike.
So, yeah, I only came in at the tail end of that, so Mike and Niamh especially, you were there for the long haul, so you can chip in on the history of it. But I kind of came in working on it sort of after the ban had been won already. And then there were existing permits that were still valid because the Labour government of the time didn't roll back those permits. And there was this Austrian oil company, OMV, that was coming to Aotearoa and wanted to drill some new oil and gas wells. And we made life really hard for them. And I remember in 2018, we had the school strikes. There was this massive energizing within the climate movement off the back of all these young people standing up for their future. And we collaborated with a lot of the school strikers on this campaign against OMV and just launched this real relentless attack where we were basically, as Mike was saying, sort of taking direct action and preventing them from doing business as usual everywhere, whether it was at their headquarters or their, capturing footage of their oil rig out at sea as it was coming in, or boarding their supply vessels, or shutting down their office in Taranaki. It was just relentless for a year. And I remember, Russell, you've got this article where they interviewed the executive director of OMV in Aotearoa, who basically said, like, our business here isn't going to be viable if they keep coming at us because it's just too much and we can't do it. And that, that's like what Mike was saying, that just shows the power of direct action. And, we worked with a bunch of people who were not even adults yet and who were willing to risk arrest, put their bodies on the line to stop the oil industry from wrecking their future. And that's really inspiring. And I think we're going to see more of that because people are just feeling like, if politicians won't protect them or their kids or their grandkids from these destructive industries, then I guess they're just going to have to do it themselves. And, if you're feeling that way, then, yeah, get involved because there's plenty more where that came from. Yeah, that's my part in the campaign, but you guys were involved from the get-go pretty much.
Where are we at now?
Oh, sorry, where are we at now? Well, now I find quite interesting because it feels like Shane Jones in particular, as the Minister of Resources, is trying to do seemingly everything he can to try and attract the oil industry back here. For example, by removing the requirement for the oil industry to clean up their mess after they've gone, by saying, now we'll cover it, we'll pay the millions of dollars to clean up your mess. Let's just let the taxpayer carry that. I'm trying to, basically doing anything to try and sweeten the deal. But, we're not seeing any takers. And if you read what the analysts within the energy industry have to say, these are oil and gas people who are saying, the nail is already in the coffin. Like, we don't think anyone's interested because it takes a lot of time to set yourself up here. And if you know that at the next election, the tide could completely turn, or if you know that for a decade there were hundreds of people who were literally resisting your industry from getting established, like, you're not going to come here. It's not a smart move. So I think that's a really important reminder because sometimes we feel like our only power is at the voting booth, or that, like, if the government is against us, then all is lost. But, like, it really isn't, because the John Key government was pushing hard for that oil and gas, and this new government is doing everything imaginable to try and win them back, but that win is enduring because of the resistance. And yeah, I think we just, like Mike's been saying all along, it's taking that resistance directly to the destroyers, to the polluters, is exactly what we have to do in spite of the government, and almost just ignoring what Shane Jones has to say about it, because that's not where the power is.
Should we make the new slogan of the country? This is Tiger Country? This is Tiger Country. When the Air New Zealand did. Anything to add? What was it like bobbing around in front of an oil ship, Russell?
Well, that was fun. So we one part of it. It was quite good fun. So we were one part of the campaign very briefly was there was this giant 22,000 ton oil exploration vessel that was 120 metres long called the Amazon Warrior. And one of the things we did was we swam in front of it. It had a kind of giant tail behind it, this seismic blasting thing that was 7 kilometres long and 2 kilometres wide. This huge field behind it that was blasting in order to try to find oil. So we swam in front of it and it kind of disrupted its oil exploration, and that's why I ended up in front of the courts. But I reckon the thing about energy is that it's also a case where it's a fantastic story. Like, you know, because we have the chance to decarbonise transport in New Zealand. And if we decarbonise transport, it is fantastic for our economy because we spend $8 billion a year or more on imported transport energy. That's oil, petrol and diesel we have to import. It's a huge drag on the economy currently. We can generate our own transport energy by electrifying the transport sector. Not just private cars, but also electric buses, electric bikes, and trains, of course. That is a huge economic win for New Zealand and is a great vision. And in terms of where we generate that power, we've already started to build out some of the generation we need. We need a lot more generation. But it's a fantastic story and a fantastic economic opportunity. So to Amanda's point about a vision for New Zealand, in the energy space, we've got a fantastic pathway in front of us. We just need a government that is willing to grasp the nettle and really double down on it. And so, you know, I think the Ardern government did some good things. They did the oil and gas exploration ban, which was great. I mean, you know, a really important thing. Obviously, it was because of the movement behind it, and we've held it in place because we've made it so difficult for anyone to come at it. But what was kind of missing really was on the other side of it is the big plan in energy. And I think that a future government, the door is wide open to that kind of vision. And I think we really need to encourage future governments to actually embrace that vision for energy and transport and electrification and renewables in this country because it's a great vision.
Can I get into the weeds of energy policy? Because I just want to myth bust a little thing, because Chris Bishop and Christopher Luxon keep telling us, oh, we need the fast track because we need more renewables. So that's how they're selling the fast track process, and sort of casually ignoring the fact that there's a bunch of mining and like coal mining, etc. involved. But just one thing to say about the benefits of the energy revolution, like the technology that we have means that it is possible for people to generate their own energy in community or on their home. And what we don't want to happen is a process which fast tracks a whole bunch of massive solar farms that are owned by overseas asset managers where the profits are all offshored, or wind turbines in places where people, particularly tangata whenua, don't want them, which we saw with the previous fast-track process with the wind turbines for the Hiringa plant. So, you know, and interestingly, the offshore wind industry has specifically said they won't use the fast-track because they know it's a problem for their social license and they want to do things properly. So I just want to myth bust that a little bit, like what we need is a government that's going to help people solarize their own homes. We've advocated for a zero interest loan, businesses solarizing, council buildings solarizing, community wind projects and so on. But energy projects that actually benefit the community rather than these kind of mega developments where profits go offshore and the electricity prices just stay high for everyone in New Zealand. And you end up, you know, with power being generated for data centers rather than for people. So there's some nuance there, and I just wanted to interject with the nerdiness, but don't buy the BS if Christopher Luxon says that the fast track is all about renewables, because the fast track is about corporate interests getting what they want. It's not about helping people to lower their energy bills.
Can we just take a brief moment to appreciate people like Amanda who can do energy policy analysis and then hang off a building? And sometimes in the same breath. It's very impressive. Very impressive human, Amanda. Okay, we talked a little bit about Russel before the courts, but Mike has Fonterra and some other polluters before the courts right now. Can you tell us, and I believe you've been in court today, can you tell us a little bit about your case against the polluters and where that's at?
Yeah, so we got two cases. One of them is against the New Zealand government just for their lack of action on realistic climate action in reducing emissions. And so recently that was thrown out of court, and so we're back in front of the appeal court. We've just filed the appeal. We're not too fazed by the fact that it was thrown out of court. That seems to be the process with these things, is that the lower courts find it a little bit difficult. These are big issues. They want them to be considered by more senior judges, and so they just kind of kick them into touch. We appealed against that. We took it to the appellate, to the Supreme Court. 5 senior jurists, 5 judges said yes, that the case does have merit. So they've reinstated the case. And so I think we've got a date for the 27th of March 2027, I think, for the actual hearing. So today we were up in the court to do what's called the interlocutory hearings, which is we sit down, our legal team sits down with the legal teams of the top 7 polluters in the country. And we have a bit of a conversation with the judge about how the case is framed, what are the kind of key issues, and so the whole process refines down to the core issues that'll be argued year after next when it finally gets to court. So that's the case against the Fonterra. So I guess the legal strategy is one of the tools in the toolkit. We can unclip the chain off the necks of our legal friends in the legal fraternity and let them go charging across the environment. We've got some pretty switched on friends in the legal profession that are prosecuting this case. But that's only a rarefied atmosphere. Only a few people can do that. While it can have major results, it's the purview of just a few people to argue those things. On the other hand, organising amongst communities is as powerful, if not even more powerful. Because what I found, though, in my life in regard to law reform is that it tends to follow public opinion. And so when, for example, gay rights became more socialised within societies, you started seeing the laws reflecting that. The environmental movement developed in the late 60s and during the 70s. You started to see the laws starting to reflect that. Equally with Māori rights, through the 60s and 70s, they started to develop. And ultimately the courts were dragged and the government were dragged kicking and screaming along. But it's driven by people's movements. So together we can win. Together we can win these great shifts in societies and civilizations. But by ourselves, if we're just separated, we won't win. It's organisation that makes the difference. And so what we're going to be doing for the rest of this year, at the moment we're currently working on, what is the strategic plans and strategies we can put into place that can mobilise and give people out in the regions targets. How do we communicate what are the targets in your region? What are the things that you need to be concerned about? What are some of the ways that people can organise, and so what are some of the things that people can do? And so what are some of the tactics? Because we're also very keen on keeping people safe. And I think Greenpeace has an amazing track record of keeping people safe, keeping its activists safe, so that we do the radical things, if you like, but everybody comes home for dinner, and nobody gets badly hurt. And I think that's the key to it. The key is making sure that when our communities are taking these actions, that they're kept safe, and we do it in the most responsible way that we can. And so I think that's what this year needs to be. This year needs to be developing those strategies and tactics out in the regions and looking at the sequencing. Which ones need to go first? Where are the dependencies? Where are the flow-on impacts? How do we base it around the political calendar, if you like? And so if we get a national plan like that together and give everybody who's listening online, all of you here today, an opportunity to play, our collective part in this great task that's in front of us. So I think we've just, for those people who have got some skill and experience in this, it's beholden upon us to sort of lay out, I think, a bit of a map, an environmental map, and to create those opportunities for people to come. And they will. We walked down Queen Street with you guys the other day, 40,000 Aucklanders were there. For us in our mining kaupapa up north, we said to the to mineralogy, did you see that? 40,000 people in Auckland. Now, there's only 2,000 people in our community, but we've got 40,000 mates in Auckland. And what we're going to do is give them a ring, and they're going to come up, you know, and they're like, because they weren't really nervous about us with our 2,000 people. But when they saw these guys walking down the street with you, the 40,000, all of a sudden, it was a whole new ball game. And so this is how we've got to, you know, we've got to see the benefit in the collectivisation of effort. And this is the way urban areas can really support rural areas, because there's probably not a lot of mining that's going on in Mount Eden. Weird. But it's happening out in the regions, and so, you know, we need to create opportunities for people to connect. And we were already starting to plant food, you know, for when the time we were going to call everybody up. We were already starting to think about, okay, we're going to have to start planting big gardens. We'll probably have land occupations like that were like the ones out at Humatao, and we'll be inviting young people to come up for the summer in their hundreds and thousands to stand together, and that's what we need to be doing. If we do that, we will win. We've proved it in the past. We'll prove it again. It's what wins. So it's beholden upon us to create the infrastructure, to create the opportunity, to create the invitations, and then look after you when you come, and make sure you go home again all in one piece. Yeah.
Well, how are people feeling? Positive. Okay. Do you want to keep going for a little bit before we go into questions? Keep going for a bit. Good. This is an interactive day. Well, I think we should just segue quickly to everyone's favourite polluter, because, Mike, you've got a case against Fonterra, but so do we at Greenpeace. And when we're inspiring everyone to go out and take action, it's good to know who we think we should take action against. So, everyone's favourite polluter, Fonterra. Amanda, do you want to tell us a little bit about Greenpeace's case against Fonterra?
Sure. So this is kind of what we were talking about before, that if the government is kind of failing to protect people, then you take the fight directly to the polluters. And so Fonterra is New Zealand's biggest polluter in many, many ways, but climate polluter for sure. And so we decided to sue them. And our approach is slightly different to Mike's, who you're suing them directly on emissions. But for us, it was about misleading claims on packaging. And that maybe sounds a bit niche, but I think it's important to remember that Fonterra's brand is all about being clean and green and pure and grass-fed in particular. That's how they market their products to overseas customers who think, you know, New Zealand is this beautiful rolling pasture place, and that's where I want my dairy to come from, happy cows feeding on green grass. And so, directing our efforts at exposing that that's actually not true leaves them vulnerable to those overseas customers who are the kind of majority of the majority of the people who are buying those products. You know, the vast 90% of New Zealand dairy is shipped overseas. It's a huge export market. And so particularly they had a label on their packaging for Anchor butter that said 100% New Zealand grass-fed. Actually, if you look at Fonterra's grass-fed standard, there's, devil in the detail, which is up to 20% of what a dairy cow eats could be palm kernel, which is made from the palm industry. They grind up the kernel from the palm fruit, and they turn it into this dust-like stuff that apparently tastes like soap, and cows hate it, and that's what they feed the cows in the dry summer months because there isn't enough grass to feed all the cows. But even more in the detail, Fonterra classifies some things as grass that you wouldn't think are grass. Like, do people think that beets and broccoli are grass? No, I don't think so. And so, if you've heard of or seen the pictures of the intensive winter grazing that happens in Southland, where you've got these cows knee deep in mud, giving birth in mud, that's intensively feeding them on fodder crops like, brassicas and legumes in Fonterra's words, but yeah, beets and Brussels sprouts and that kind of kale and that kind of thing. So that's classed as grass, according to Fonterra. But yeah, I think it's exposing this whole myth that, you know, cows are happily feeding on grass when actually they're wading around in mud or eating this dust that's made from the palm oil industry that's connected to deforestation and so on. So that's the case that we have going on at the moment. And I don't know if you saw, we had a little mini win, which was that Fonterra chose to remove that label from the packaging pretty much as soon as we launched that case. But the case is still relevant because, you know, that branding and marketing has been on the packaging for a while, and it's still a really integral part of how they do all of their marketing globally. So we're looking forward to seeing how they try and wriggle their way out of that one.
Yeah, that's a really good strategy. Attacking the brand of companies. We did a similar thing to the Norwegian oil company Statoil, and we caused, you know, with the help of excellent comms teams like the one that Nick Young runs for Greenpeace, Māori Media and others, you know, it's just pumping out the information and damaging their reputation, so that when you anybody did a search of Statoil on the internet, they just got like pages and pages of Māoris going crazy, you know, and so they had to change. They changed their name in the end. They're no longer called Statoil. They're called Equinor because of that. We did such reputational damage to them that their shareholders were just freaking out. You know, we turned up at one of their shareholder meetings over in Norway, and we sat there and I listened to the CEO talk about how wonderful everything is and reassuring the shareholders everything's all right. And then we got up and said, well, look, you know, you're going to lose a lot of money in New Zealand. You're going to lose a lot of money, and because you have no social license there. And then the Sami Parliament, the indigenous people, their president came over to do a fact-finding mission over in the far north, see what on earth was going on. And the day that she arrived in the north was the day that the Norwegian government pulled Statoil out, because it was just hurting their reputation so much. So you can't underestimate that power of that kind of campaign. And so it's it might sound like, yeah, that's not the big kind of like smack in the jaw that we need to deliver, but it's the death of 1,000 cuts, you know, that type of reputational damage. And you're never too sure when that straw, the last little straw, is going to break the camel's back. But it's just having, I think, a multi-layered serious or tactical approach where you just got so much stuff going on that it's just relentless and it overwhelms the opposition. But you need good organisation to do that. You need teams of dedicated professionals that are at it every day. That's why, you know, I support our Greenpeace family because that's what they are. Not everybody can do that. They've got lives to lead, and we've all got problems and to sort out. But if we have dedicated teams who are providing the infrastructure and the tools and the mechanisms, it helps immensely. Equally, we can't just all rely upon Greenpeace to do it all. We've got to mirror that in communities because, I know Greenpeace can sort of penetrate the digital world, but it's local communities that know the pathways and can do the last 100 yards into the jungle, right, into the jungles of our own worlds. And so it's that local knowledge, it's that local commitment, it's that local organisation that really does provide the strength and the momentum. So it's a question of putting that all together, and you put that together and we shall overcome. Yeah.
Well said. Russell, I'm going to ask you, how does one grow united movements in such divisive times?
Well, I reckon by forming unlikely alliances. So, like one of the things going out to rural communities who are drinking poisoned water that's been poisoned by intensive agriculture. So, you know, you think about the strategy of federated farmers and the different agri-business lobby groups is to say, oh, it's the urban people versus the rural people. Actually, lots of rural people are really pissed off by the way that agribusiness has poisoned the groundwater at a landscape scale, particularly in the South Island, but also in the Waikato and other places, right? And so one of the things we're trying to do, in fact we are doing pretty successfully, is reaching out to those communities, both on the North Island and the South Island, and forming connections where we go, we both have a shared interest in cleaning up this mess. which, I think has gone really well. And the other thing I reckon, just on food, right, because I think the struggle around food is different to the struggle around energy. We basically have to kill off the oil and coal industry, right? I mean, there's no future for oil, coal, and gas. It's a matter of how fast we phase it out, but we have to kill off that industry because it's not compatible with a living planet. However, when it comes to the food production system, we need to change the way that we produce our food. We're still obviously going to still need to produce food. We just need to very radically change the way the food production system works. And so that means we have lots of allies out there who agree with us. You look at the organic sector, you look at the regenerative sector, where obviously there's a lot of debate as to what is regenerative and what's really sustainable, so there's a lot of greenwashing that happens. But nonetheless, there are lots of people in the food system who want to change the way we produce food. And so there are key allies out there. Now, one of the things Greenpeace does is we deal with the really confrontational, gnarly bit because somebody has to do that bit of it. I always talk about an ecosystem of change agents, right? In the ecosystem of change agents, one of the jobs of Greenpeace is to confront the most difficult and dangerous opponents. That's part of our job. So Statoil, Fonterra, some of the biggest, most dangerous corporations, our job is to confront them. But we also know that there's lots of other organisations and people out there who are working on solutions, and we support them as well. And so in the ecosystem of change agents, you find lots of different groups who are promoting organics and regenerative and lots of different ways, biodynamics, different ways to produce food in a much more sustainable way. So it's this very interesting thing that's happening at the moment, is that we are forming unusual alliances, but there's also all these people out there who are doing great stuff in the food space, and we want to be positive about that and support that, even at the same time as we confront the big industrial food agri-giants who are literally trying to change the science around the way methane warming is measured at the moment. That's one of their global programs. So yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of opportunities, but we really need to be non-sectarian. The people that we work with, we're not going to agree with on everything. They're not going to think we're pure, and we're not going to think they are pure when we look at each other. But if we can find common ground to work in a positive way together, then we should find that positive ground and work together, because sectarian politics, where we won't work with people unless they're absolutely 100% pure, is no way forward. It will not work. It's never worked in the past. It will not work now. So if you think about the last great progressive transformational period, the 1930s, when basically, you had this huge global movement where capitalism was domesticated to make it much more compatible with humanity. So the great rise in the social welfare state, the domestication of the finance sector, and everything else that happened in the 1930s and 40s in Aotearoa with the first Labour government and Michael Joseph Savage, but also in the New Deal in the United States, with Chifley across the ditch in Australia, with the Attlee government in Britain. Those movements were very diverse. They involved lots and lots of different people. You think of the Ratana Church here, right? So the Ratana Church was very involved in the first Labour government. You think about the social credit political movement, which most of you probably have never heard of, but that was very involved in the first Labour government, which reached out to small farmers and small business people and brought them on board inside the first Labour government and the reforms that happened there. Just like the Ratana Church reached out to the Māori community and found alliances there. So I do think it's a real lesson that we just need to be very broad-minded, seek positive, the common ground. Even we do some of the difficult things that Greenpeace needs to do, which is confront the most difficult and dangerous corporate actors in governments where they exist. There's also all these other common grounds and common fronts where we can work together.
So in all of this, working together, been the bad guys and taking direct action and ecosystem of change making we're all going to do. Can you each consider, vocally, what individuals can do to help make this happen? So what can people do as individuals? What can people do in their communities? What can people do with Greenpeace and other organizations out there? How do people realistically make this happen? Because I guess some people here are very close to this work and know exactly how to get involved, but a whole lot of other people don't and are tearing their hair out about the climate and biodiversity crisis.
I have a thought which maybe sounds cliche, but it's get offline and get in real life, because I think a lot of us who care about a lot of things feel this need to always be on top of everything, to know what's going on in the world and to be sort of aware of all the different crises that are happening. But I think that burns a lot of energy and isn't very productive. And it can also silo us quite a lot. Like, I've definitely seen the people in my family and life who've become quite sort of right-wing in their thinking. They're people who spend a lot of time at home and a lot of time looking at things that are in their own silo on the internet or listening to the radio or whatever, just kind of becoming immersed in all the negative news and becoming siloed by the increasingly divisive social media landscape. And I think what often helps is to get out into the real world and meet actual people, because when you're face to face with someone having a conversation, you will always find the common ground, and you will realize that the world, like, most people are good and most people care, and you know, the digital world can feel really hostile, but actually we have a lot of similar values to each other. So, you know, that's vague, but I would just say, like, the best way to be active is not to know all the things by constantly scrolling and knowing the latest updates. It's to actually be out in the world, talking to people and building human connections. I'd say that's the most important thing. And then, you know, there's a scale of radicalization, you know, whether you want to hang off a building or whether you want to grow things in your garden, or, it's like, get active with real people, plant things, build things, make things, talk to people. And that's the best salve, I think, for our souls in this very difficult time as well, is just to create stuff and to connect with people.
I think there's a lot of different roles that people can play. It's like a huge jigsaw puzzle, and every single one of us has got a piece of that, you know, a piece of this world, a piece of this life. But there's different roles that people can play. You know, you can be the ones that ring the bell and bang the drum, you know, energize others, energize communities, unfreeze issues, shine lights on them, that type of activism. There's the legitimisation role, if you're an elder or if you're a person that has some sort of mana or expertise in something, you can legitimise what people are saying by saying, yep, that's absolutely true. You know, I'm a professor of whatever, and I'm saying that what this group of people are saying is absolutely true, and we stand beside that. And then sort of down the continuum, you've got like early adopters, people that start picking up the new behaviours, they start modelling, they start designing the exemplars that show that this is real and positive and can work. You've got people that will maintain social change movements. They might not want to get out there and bang the drum. They might not want to go on the media and say, yes, that's all true, I believe in that. But they're, you know, happy to be licking the stamps and folding the brochures and just providing the kind of heart and soul of movements. Then you've got the people that turn up, you know, and so I guess the basic thing is, you know, when you're called, come, you know, because that's probably the most important thing is everybody, you know, getting up, like Amanda says, you know, just getting active, getting away from activism, collectivism, or whatever it's called, and to be part of a real change movement. But there's lots of different roles, so you know who you are in respect of all of that. You know who has got authority in your family, how you can... I'm a real believer is sometimes you might call a meeting and you might not be able to attract too many people, but take your family. How many people in your family? You know, have a talk, have a discussion with your family and start that sort of nucleus organisation just amongst your own family. Do some fundraising, decide if there's somebody you want to nominate and support to take a role, get in behind them and support them materially. Just to summarise, there's a role for everybody to play. And so once again, I think if we do that job of designing strategy, tactics, targets, opportunities, and time frames, and lay that down as a basic fabric, potentially people can find themselves a role in that. We don't want to have to be doing it for you. We've got to be doing it for each other. That's the key part of it.
Yeah. I reckon the other thing I'd add is like, remember that a lot of the people who are activists who are creating the framework for action are volunteers. And so you may not find the perfect activism opportunity. So you're going to have to push yourself a little bit to find the right place. It might be you have to look harder than you might like to. It might be that you reach out to a group and you don't really get a response because they're just overwhelmed, right? So remember, like, you know, like Greenpeace is like one of the most organised bits of the whole thing. And, you know, we just rely on supporters' money. You know, we don't take government money or business money. We don't have like all of that. So even the most organised bits of it, we're feeling, you know, pretty stretched, right, with everything that's coming at us. So it's also part of it's like, this is the time for action, right? So, you know that Lou Reed song, right? I don't know if people know the Lou Reed, it's a fantastic song. You know, he...
Would you care to sing a bit?
This is no time for political speech. But anyway... in the song, Lou Reed's going, this is not the time for just talking. This is the time for action. The future's within reach. And when Lou wrote that song, it seemed like things were pretty pressing. But my God, we are facing actual fascism now, right? Yeah. So let's not kid ourselves. Like, you know, when people get up there and go, look, we're at a fork in the road or something like that. You know, people say, we're at a fork in the road, you know. My God, we are at a fork in the road. Have you seen what's going on in the world? Like, you know, Elon Musk, the world's richest man, is encouraging people to vote for Alternative for Deutschland, which is a neo-Nazi party, in the upcoming general election in Germany. Yeah, boo. So things are pretty grim. Elon Musk and Donald Trump are ignoring court orders to change what they're doing. They are completely basically saying, we are going to break the Constitution of the United States because we are not going to follow what those courts tell us to do. So we are literally facing actual fascism in our lifetimes right in front of us. Just look at what's happening. The rise of the far right, Le Pen in France, in Austria, you name it, right? So it's all on, right? Just like in the 1930s, like 100 years ago, it was all on. The people like us in the 1930s didn't know if they would win or lose. They did not know. They faced down fascism and they won. Right? But it didn't have to end like that. The only reason heaps of people just like us said, I'm going to keep trying, I'm going to find a way to do something. Like, yeah, they didn't respond to my email or whatever. They didn't have email back then. But, you know, I'm going to find a way to get involved and do something to support change because I cannot sit here and do nothing. Well, the world, not only is it like this incredible climate and biodiversity crisis, which it is, but then laid over the top of it, we have this full-scale attack on democracy from within democratic states. It is a full-scale attack, right? So that is the time that we happen to live in, just like people in the 1930s happened to live in that time. They didn't ask for it. They didn't ask to face down actual fascists. Well, that's us. Here we are. And so if there ever was an historic moment to get up and be an activist in the world, well, I reckon this is it. Certainly in my lifetime, this is the biggest emergency that we have faced so far in my lifetime. So yeah, find your way, get involved. Don't expect that the people who are trying to help you are going to have all the answers. They're busy too. Often they're just volunteers and not paid, or they're overwhelmed. But try to find your way to engage in this great historic moment to not only save the climate for our kids, save the remnants of this incredible biodiversity on this wonderful blue planet that we happen to have been born on, but also save what's left of democracy and deepen it.
Without dropping any mics, we are going to turn to the audience for some questions. Fran, our friend Fran, who you will all remember from the beginning of the show, is here with a microphone. So if you have a question from the audience, she will bring it to you. And just remember to speak right into the mic because we do have our friends on the live stream as well. So we want to make sure that they can participate too.
Is it possible and easy to put the house lights up a bit? Because I like to see you all. We can't see. We can't
see you.
Carol Cowan from Extinction Rebellion. Last time I saw you, Russell, we were carrying a banner together. a year ago on the March for Nature. Inspiring talk, thank you. And Mike in particular, really pulling us together. A challenge, please, to Greenpeace. You talk about reaching out into the communities, and particularly the rural communities. What about the myriad of activist community groups that we've got as a community? And as an example, we as Extinction Rebellion have on several occasions gone to gone to Fonterra and symbolically shut them down, irritated the hell out of them. And but here, are you going and doing this Fonterra action, and you didn't think to let us know? And we would have gone down and endorsed what you're doing if we had have known. Just one example. And for those people, the big cry that you had for people to get active, we're doing it as small groups. We've got a writers group that meets by Zoom every Monday morning. So if you want to get writing and to, particularly letters to the editor, look at the most recent listener, and you'll see a letter there from Jill Jackson, one of our people. And we have a fledgling agitprop group, street theatre group, if that's your thing. We do fun little actions because that's what we're capable of at the moment. But if you let us know, we would enhance what you're doing. It feels like you're siloing yourself from us. So there's a challenge to you.
Thank you, Carol. I'm not on the panel, but I'm going to chip in on this one because at the moment I'm the person responsible for the warehouse at Greenpeace. So for those of you who don't know, Greenpeace, at our office in Auckland, we have an office building where we all work. And then downstairs we have a warehouse where we make the actions happen and people learn how to climb and people make banners and people do all kinds of things. And that is usually pretty full of activists from all around the city and wider region, actually, from other groups. And that is an open invitation that if you are working on kaupapa that's close to ours, that's an open invitation. So if you want to come and talk to me or Charlie, who's out there, that's something we welcome. And then maybe into the kind of ecosystem of change stuff, I think there's an ecosystem of types of action that people do. And sometimes, I guess the formal way of saying it is sometimes Greenpeace breaks the law to highlight environmental injustice. So sometimes when we're doing actions that break the law, that comes with real legal risk, right? And when people are going to break the law, anyone who knows they're going to break the law is also implicated in that. So often, if we're going to do something like climb the Fonterra building, like Amanda did, then it does require a different kind of engagement with people. And so sometimes we do things where actually people don't know, and other times we do things where we say, hey, come do it with us. And that's kind of one of the ways that we have to operate, but really interested to kind of keep talking more. Any more? Oh, you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I was reflecting as you were talking about, remember we did that action against OMV, that vessel in Timaru?
Scandi Atlantic.
Yeah, the Scandi Atlantic, and that was a joint action by Student Strike for Climate, XR and Greenpeace, and that was awesome. So, I mean, I think XR does great work, and, we've worked with XR many times, so we're not at all, there may have been occasions where perhaps we should have reached out and we didn't. But as a policy position, our position has been to form alliances, and we have worked with XR on a stack of stuff. If there's something we should have reached out about, well, sorry, we just must have, I don't know why it didn't happen. But sometimes, like Niamh says, it's also the kind of action makes it a bit tricky. But I think XR is such an interesting example, right? Because XR in some ways, it's kind of ballooned up out of the blue, like what 3-4 years ago? I can't remember now. What's that? 6, was it? Yeah. And then kind of, came this big thing, and it was like fantastic, and it kind of really added a huge amount to the movement. And then it kind of got a bit smaller, but it's still there, right? It's not like it's disappeared, but it kind of had that first moment where it was blossoming and was, very exciting. And then it's kind of got a bit smaller, but it's now become part of the kind of like Greenpeace and many others, part of the ecosystem of change agents. And I agree, we need to find ways to work together. Greenpeace is kind of like, I sometimes think of Greenpeace as like an institution. it's like we're a progressive institution, like, because we have staff, we have, buildings and all that kind of stuff, whereas XR was more of a kind of movement that, really exploded and then kind of contracted a bit. And I kind of think Greenpeace's job is, in part, as an institution, is to maintain its presence all the way through so that we can support movements as they come and make sure we create like the warehouse space for others and stuff like that. But we try to maintain a constant existence, if you like, through all of that, with all of our many rules and regulations and finances and all the rest of it that we have as an institution. So it's kind of different roles as well, which I think is interesting about how different groups relate together. But yeah, all power to XR.
I also want to get Charlie wherever she is in the room. Can you wave? This is Charlie. This is Charlie, who is working in the warehouse and is our volunteer coordinator at Greenpeace. And so she's often the person that if you want to get involved or you want us to be involved, this is who you should talk to. Hi and bye. Any more questions?
Hi, Elliot Crossan from System Change Aotearoa. I had a question for Amanda, because in your explanation of the political situation, you said that the government doesn't seem to know what they're doing, doesn't seem to have a plan, but you also identified how all of their policies are making these corporations much richer. Do you think it's fair to say that that is the plan?
That's a great question. I mean, the short answer I think is yes. But I guess like it isn't a cohesive plan. It's just kind of whoever bids the highest and talks the loudest gets heard, I guess. And that's why it's important. I think we talked about this recently in one of our communications about how we need the people to fight the money, because it's like the corporate lobbyists have all the money and the resources they can pump into, going to meetings in Wellington, or if it's advertising or whatever it is. And I think we can never match that. So our counter weapon or counter move or whatever has to be movements of people. And like Niamh was saying before, I think it is amazing that we ever win anything when we're up against those kind of forces. And I think that's testament to the fact that most people do care, and most people want, a good future for our kids. They want to look after the environment. They want to look after other people. And sometimes that's hard to remember when you're kind of deep in the weeds of the news and everything feels really negative. But I think most people want to do the right thing, and that's how we win.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for an awesome kōrero so far. I'm Elliot as well. I was wondering what sources of inspiration you have, if there are books, movies, podcasts, or anything that galvanizes you or gives you hope for everyone.
I've just finished reading Naomi Klein's Doppelganger, which concludes with some of the same things you've been saying about mass movements and community working together, people power, against all sorts of really bizarre rabbit holes that people have gone down. In her case, she gets, early in the book, she's confused with Naomi Wolf, who's gone down all sorts of rabbit holes and is actually cooperating with Steve Bannon and his War Room podcast. Anyway, I can recommend it as an amazingly subtle and sophisticated read.
For people on the live stream, that was a recommendation from the audience of Naomi Klein's Doppelganger, which I second as a wonderful read.
Sorry, I'm not going to answer your question, Elliot. I just want to acknowledge you. Elliot was involved in the school strikes, and you didn't say that, but you guys had a huge impact on the climate movement back in 2018-19. So just want to acknowledge you. And this is going to sound super cheesy, but like you guys were really inspiring, because when you've been working, when you're like an old activist fogey who's been trying to work on this stuff for more than a decade, probably two now. you end up in these dips where you just think all hope is lost, and then just out of nowhere you get groups like the School Strikers or like XR, like Russell was saying, and you just go, holy shit, there's hope. But in terms of inspirational stuff, like I find inspiration kind of from the past a lot of the time, just like seeing the stuff that people had to face and they did it anyway, and how, you know, it doesn't feel very courageous to climb something when you've been, you know, when you know what you're doing, when you compare it to people who've had to fight wars and, you know, resist fascism, like Russell was saying. Like, I think, sorry, that's a really incoherent answer, but I think I do generally find inspiration from the past because people have had to face just absolutely horrendous political and other situations, and they've managed to endure and still have fun and create music and laugh and create art and all the things despite all the horrible things they've had to experience.
Sources of self-inspiration over here.
Talafalava, kia ora. My name is Aingangale Fili from the villages of Whaiae and Samongi, Savai, Samoa, and born and raised in Mangere, South Auckland. Thank you all so much for sharing very generously your knowledge with us. My question in particular is for Matua Mike Smith. I wanted to ask you, what are, not so much words of encouragement, but what is some guidance you would give to rangatahi or young indigenous youth? We talk about the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, but for us, it is also in many ways a cultural crisis because our cultures are ecologically derived. And when we come from communities that often have to grapple with immediate need versus the need for systemic change, it can spread us quite thin as a community. And for rangatahi who can feel the weight of that, what would be your words of advice or some guidance you would like to impart on them? Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm always impressed by the generations that are coming up after us, the younger people, particularly the ones who have been part of the renaissance of culture. And so we've got a generation, or we've probably got 2-3 generations now of children that have grown up within kura kaupapa Māori, kuanga reo, whare wānanga, whom have reshaped their cultural values and been able to strip away some of the values that colonisation has brought and replace those. You know, so I'm talking about individualism. So being less individualistic and more collective would be one of the things. To be more focused on the natural world as opposed to not, or being alienated from the natural world. And so there's been this kind of value shift amongst our young people. So that's very heartening to see. So I think we've just got to scale that up and create more opportunities for young people to shift their framework of reference in terms of what it means to be alive in this dangerous time. There's a lot of aroha amongst our young people, and less aggression that I'm finding amongst kids that have been through those processes. So I find that to be really optimistic. So my advice therefore would be, you know, kia uki ki ngā tikanga o tā tātou nei tūpono o nehe rā. So hold on to those precious teachings that have been handed down to us from our old people. Don't feel the pressure to have to solve all the problems. Go together as older generations, younger generations, even down to the tamariki, you know, that we should all travel together on this journey, and don't feel like it's just the young people that have to solve all the problems. You know, lean on your elders, but also push them as well. You know, and just as we must lean on our children, but we must drag them along as well too. So just off the top of my head. But I think also as we rediscover and recover ourselves, we come to understand where we fit within the Pacific and where we fit within the global community. So I think that's a really beautiful thing that we're seeing happening amongst our young kids. My kids in particular, they can sing songs in Samoan, Tongan, they can play the ukulele like Cook Island people. They've just got this way broader cultural understanding of what it's like to be in Te Mana Nui Akiva. And so I'll encourage that. I encourage that we get out of our silos, our own cultural silos, and that we work with each other a lot more. I think this is the largest Polynesian city on the planet, and yet we haven't seen the full potential of that. And I think there's a lot to be. There's a real blossoming that's just latently ready to erupt. Anyway, ka nui mō tēnei. Good question. Thank you.
Any more questions? Oh, here we go.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. I was wondering what would be the impact of the international politics in New Zealand and maybe towards climate change, because I feel like everyone is more go easy on everything that is wrong, thanks to Trump and Musk and everything. So I was just wondering, what should we be worried and scared and attentive about in New Zealand?
Look, I mean, at one level, I reckon what's going on, particularly with Trump, right, is making it harder because globally, because suddenly the United States has pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, for instance, and obviously launched a huge attack on climate science. They're tracking down all the grants that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has provided on climate change, for instance. They're searching through the database to find any grants that NOAA has provided on climate science and all the rest of it. So that is obviously extremely problematic, and I think has weakened the global movement on climate change. I think there's no question about that. And that is empowering or encouraging climate denialism. So if you go back a few years, like climate denialism was in big retreat. And so the debate really was between greenwashing and climate action. It's like, well, very few people and major institutions were willing to take a climate denialist position. Whereas now a bunch of, what the Republican Party in the United States is now fully into climate denialism, whereas before it was kind of somewhere between climate denialism and greenwashing. There weren't many Republicans who wanted climate action. Maybe Bloomberg was the exception, but whereas now it's much more towards the climate denialism end. That's going to empower parties like the ACT Party here and that wing of the National Party who are essentially climate denialists. And so I think that has, I think no question, put us on the back foot globally because of that. It weakens everything. Without being Pollyanna-ish about it, I also think it has really, I think it is going to produce a very strong reaction. Watching the world's richest man take resources away from the poorest people in the United States and globally, you think of the attack on USAID. I mean, literally the richest man in the world is taking food out of the hands of the poorest people on the planet. I mean, literally. I mean, not symbolically, but actually. I think there's going to be a really strong reaction to all of that. And so I think that, like, the age of the billionaires is going to come to an end, and they're going to accelerate it. I just think that people they're just going to make people really mad. And so, if part of taking action on climate change is challenging power structures, because it has to be, I think that we're going to see some really strong popular resistances to this. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to win or how it's going to play out, but I do think that there's going to be a very strong reaction to this thing. And I think we're going to see it here and elsewhere. That means a more polarised world, I guess. It also means the consensus on climate change is kind of almost dead. So there was a consensus which said, we accept the science around climate change and we really must act on it. Whether we really will act on it is a different issue, but there was certainly a consensus on that proposition, which the centre-right bought into. Big chunks of the centre-right have now abandoned that consensus and have become climate denialists, right? So there is this polarisation which is happening, but I do think that's also going to mobilise a strong movement on poverty and inequality, but also on climate change. So I don't know where it's all going to end, but it's certainly going to, and certainly should, enliven the kind of movement that we are part of to really fight back, because it's all on the line now. So yes, it's basically bad, but I think the reaction might actually be extremely strong, and we may find, like, even though we're taking one step back now, we, in the not so distant future, we'll take 2 or 3 steps forward as a result.
Yeah, well, I hope that Russell's right about that. I reckon we're just one assassination away from civil war in America, and that, you know, the attempt has already been made, and it was only, you know, it's only that much away from Trump getting killed. But that polarisation is going to cause extremism, and I mean, he's just released the Proud Boys from you know, his own private militia, who he could command to storm Capitol Hill, you know, and they will. And so he's got those. They must be feeling empowered, like he's got our back, you know. But whatever we do, he's got our back. So I reckon we're moving into an extremely dangerous time, because if America implodes, if there's a civil war in America, and there's every kind of reason why you'd expect that there would be, because of the polarisation that's occurring there. And that's going to change the whole geopolitical situation of the world. I mean, Trump's already pulling back from NATO and the WTO, the UN, and they're practicing that kind of the politics of disruption. When you get in and disrupt things, you know, like big systematic things, they believe that all sorts of opportunities can arise. You know, you can storm in and take over, and so yeah, and that raises the question of, well, who are going to be the big players in the the international scene? And of course, China's poised there. They're expanding into the Pacific, and they're already starting to encroach into some of the islands. We've got the Cook Island Prime Minister signing new relationships, and so that transition is already happening. What does that mean for us here? Well, I think that increasingly the globalisation will start to unwind, or the type of globalisation that we have at the moment. We'll find there'll be a different form of globalisation that's attempted. But at the end of the day, I reckon what we ought to do is just be concerned about some of the fundamentals, you know, like our water security. If we've got water security, if we've got food security, if we've got energy security, we've got the basic sort of building blocks in order to keep ourselves relatively intact and resilient against, you know, any massive changes internationally. So yeah, I think we're just moving into a period where it's going to be a very difficult time in human history, and there could be great upheavals in the world order the world disorder as we know it at the moment. And I reckon that's just as you quoted Lou Reed. I'll quote the Rolling Stones. You know, it's just a shot away. It's just a shot away. And if somebody decides to assassinate Trump, it's going to be all on, I'd suggest.
Any more questions? Oh, yeah, one over here.
Hello, I'm Ryan. Today the IPCA came out with recommendations saying that they're looking at recommendations in regards to changing the law. Cool. In relation to protests and activists and whatnot. Mark Mitchell and the police have agreed that these need to be implemented. And it's such things like seeking permission for protests. One of the ones that I remember reading was along the lines of the senior officers have to agree to the plan of the protest for it to take head in the public realm. What's your thoughts on this? How does it impact us going forward? Is it ultimate control from the government that they're trying to silence people before we get the chance to speak, or?
So it's obviously part of a pattern. So we're seeing it. We saw it in Australia. Different Australian states have introduced a whole bunch of restrictions on the right to protest. We saw it in the UK. And so, we are in this context of the rise of right-wing politics, where they are trying to constrain people's civil liberties, and particularly their right to protest. And I think we'll see more of it. Obviously, it's something we're going to have to fight against, and it's something that we'll be, need to talk to all the political parties about. If they're in a position to form a majority in Parliament, we expect them to protect people's right to protest and to roll back any laws. Just as we would expect them to roll back something like the Regulatory Standards Bill were it to pass through Parliament, I think protecting the right to protest in civil, our civil society space is critical to a democracy and our ability to be effective. So that's, and it's part of a global pattern, as we've seen.
I really agree with that, and I would also say that if you say that someone has to have permission to protest, then you obviously think people are organising a parade, not a protest. So I think the idea is a little bit ludicrous as well, and kind of misses the point of a lot of the things that we often all do.
Can I just say one more thing on that? So I grew up in Queensland in the 80s. So we had Joh Bjelke-Petersen. So if more than 6 of us gathered together, it was an illegal protest. So street marches were banned. And so we used to have running street marches. So we used to run through the streets so the cops couldn't catch us. And so the law was that before they could arrest us, they had to say words to the effect, I'll never forget it. My name is Chief Inspector Bloggs from the Brisbane City Police Department. In my opinion, this is an illegal gathering. If you do not move, you'll be arrested. And as soon as he said arrested, they would jump on us, right, and arrest us. And so before he said this, before they got to the second last word, we would all jump up and run. And then we'd run 100 metres down the street. And they used to have a car with these giant metre-high bullhorns on the roof, where he would race down the street after us, and then he'd stop again and he'd pull out his little microphone and he'd say the same thing again, and we'd do exactly the same thing. And this used to go on all through the city, right? And like during protests, and we used to have to split up and we'd run through different parts. We'd have pre-arranged meeting points where we'd get back together. And there was a gerrymander in Queensland, so Joh only needed 1/3 of the vote to get a majority in Parliament. It was a very difficult time, talk about restrictions on civil society space. That's what it was like. But we won in the end. We got rid of Joh. We returned one person, one vote. We got our right to street marches again. And so, yes, they will try to restrict our freedoms. That's what right-wing, far-right parties always do. But we can fight against it and win. And that's exactly what we did with Joh Bjelke-Petersen. We saw him off. He was gone. And that was the end of Joh Bjelke-Petersen, even though he tried to become Prime Minister. And so, yes, they will try to do these things. We will fight back. And in the past, people like us have managed to get back our civil liberties, even when they've tried to take them away.
I think that was a roundabout answer to your question too, Elliot, about what's inspirational. And I think getting to hear great stories like that is pretty awesome.
There was one guy who really supported the ban on street marches. He marched down the street with a placard saying, "I support the ban on street marches," and he was arrested.
Hey, it's me again. We're fighting, but what about education? Should we create an activist school?
Why are you all looking at me?
Well, if you open one, I'll be the first student.
Yeah, I think it's a fabulous idea. But rather a school centralised, I just think we need a curriculum that can be transferable and taken around and broadcast amongst the community. So that's a very good idea, though. Yeah.
Can I be controversial on this one? The wise Amanda Larsson has said very noisily in our office multiple times, campaigning is not education. And so while education, I think, is a really important part of activism and the things that we all do, it's not enough in and of itself. So, and I think we know that, right? Like, we know that if we don't educate the whole, we can educate the whole public that climate change is real and climate change is a problem, but it doesn't fix that problem. And I think activism is kind of the same. And I have this really strong memory from being like 19 or something and being like, oh, someone needs to do something about this thing, blah, blah, blah. The oil company's coming to our city hall and they're going to come and go and talk to all our city councillors and someone should be doing something, blah, 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 being like real grumpy about it. And then spoke to a dear friend who used to work at Greenpeace, and she's like, oh, you're someone. And at that moment to be like, oh, shit, yes, I am someone. And that was kind of a spark of organising for me. And then was very fortunate to have people like Mike and people like the crew at Greenpeace and more recently people like Russel to learn from. And I don't really think, like there are lots of campaigning courses that exist out in the world and many of them are really great. But I think it all sits there in nice theory, and the only way that you can really learn how to do activism is by doing it, and by doing it on the job and messing it up, and by being like, right, we're going to try and do this and take a risk, and then going to anyone you can find with more experience than you and being like, hey, what does this sound like? And sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, and just doing the thing that kind of works for you, because I just don't think it's stuff that you can learn academically. And that's not to say you can't hone your skills, because I feel like campaigning is like a witchcraft of art and science, and there's a lot you can learn, and then a lot of it's like gut feeling. But the main thing about activism is getting out and doing it. So I would challenge that an activist school would actually be a real waste of wonderful activist resources, because every time they're sitting down studying, they're not out there doing it. And I think we can all teach each other on the job.
I'd just like to add to that we kind of do have one, the Kotari Centre. Somebody please remind me,
Sure.
you were in Parliament with her.
Catherine Delahunty.
No, not Catherine Delahunty.
Sue Bradford.
Thank you. But at the Kotari Centre, they're doing workshops all the time. You've got to get there.
And there's Otaki Summer Camp as well that Nikki Hager and a big crew of people run down south, and that's really wonderful. And at Greenpeace, we run something called Basic Actions Training, where we bring everyone to our office for 4 days and we teach people how to do activism in the way that we do it as Greenpeace. So I think there's lots of things you can do and things you can learn, but you don't need to go to school to do it.
Well, it can make things easier. Not like techniques, history, because I've done the action training and I learned a lot of things. What about sharing that, spreading that, and bring more people into the action?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's about skill sharing. Maybe what we're talking about is the difference between an institution, like a training institution, and the process of sharing skills, you know. And you could call both of those things education. But yeah, it's kind of like, there's this thing that we used to describe as analysis paralysis, you know, to Niamh's point, that you can spend all that time analysing, peeling the layers back, all the rest of it, and it can actually prevent you from taking the next step. And so I think there's a risk in that. But equally, it's like when you're driving a car, you know, you can just get into a car without having any training at all, and then just hurl off down the road and hurt people and hurt yourself ultimately. So there's common sense would say that there's a sweet spot in the middle between not wanting to institutionalise training, but not wanting to just say to people, do whatever you want, and there's no rules, and there's no handrails, there's no guidelines, there's no skill sharing. I mean, obviously, and I think Greenpeace does that quite well. You know, they have their training camps and actions training unit and stuff like that. But it would be good to see that, I think, exported out into communities as well. Yeah, I definitely do believe.
Just another thought on that, and this maybe speaks to Elliot's question earlier. There are books that are kind of like handbooks on how to do campaigning, and you might not know, but some of those have been utilized by the alt-right to organize their own people. So Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky is one of those books that they put in the hands of all of their organizers. And so there is literature out there, and maybe there's a job for us to kind of make that literature visible, because, you know, unless you're an activist, you maybe haven't heard about it. one thing I could recommend straight away is there's a book called How to Win Campaigns by Chris Rose, who's a former Greenpeace campaigner, which is very useful to understand the kind of philosophy of campaigning and how it's different to education or to like other kinds of advocacy. So shout out for that book. And yeah, I mean, maybe you guys have other books that you have used to inspire you over the years.
The other one that springs to mind is Beautiful Trouble.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, like if you haven't read it, it's a great little flick through. This is how you do all these different kinds of tactics that you could possibly do, which is a really great inspiration. And then you can personalize it to whatever the thing is you're working on. And a good tactic should be recycled many, many times.
And the one that our mentors always swear by is The Art of War, Sun Tzu, which is very short and easy to read. But yeah, that's their Bible for campaigning.
And also in the 80s, it was stolen by the right as well and turned into The Art of Business. So it's a really good one. We'll bring it to the school in the list. I think we had a question there, and then here, if you can. This is from online, I believe, but being read out by Elliot. No.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Hi. My name's Elliot, just to confuse you all.
So many Elliots in this room.
I've never been in a room with so many Elliots. I have two things. Actually, I want to do a plug for a podcast which Greenpeace International is doing, which is called Systems Shift. And it's all about economics. And it's a little bit nerdy, but it's actually talking about economics in a way that it's for everyday people. And I think it's really good to listen to because economics shouldn't be for economists. It should actually be for everyday people. And they talk about welfare tax and, taxing the wealthy and why we should do that, and just breaks it down in a really easy way. It's called System Shift, and it's on YouTube from Greenpeace International. I'm actually I'm looking at the YouTube, and then we've got a bunch of interested and excited people online, and just to pass on their comments, Zane is saying go to Roto Kakahi if you can, if you want an activist emergent experience, because they're fighting a ecological battle to stop the Rotorua Lakes Council to pollute their lake. Daniel is inviting everyone to show up for, if you're upset about Destiny Church, at 2 p.m. at Albert Park. And Daniel says, yeah, come along on Sunday at 2 p.m. Albert Park if you want to show solidarity for that. And there's two questions. Juan's asking a big question: why is the Treaty Principles Bill threatening to the environment in New Zealand? And Daniel is also asking, how can all the different groups know what each other are up to and planning and learn from each other and not do the same thing again? Everyone doing the same thing, yeah.
What was the first one again? Oh, the Treaty Principles Bill. Why is the Treaty Principles Bill bad for the environment?
Oh, all right. I mean, I think most people here are kind of familiar with the Treaty Principles Bill, but anyway, so Greenpeace has taken a position on the Treaty Principles Bill for a few reasons. Firstly, because it's the right thing to do, right? Just in terms of like the decolonisation pathway for this country. The Treaty of Waitangi, Te Tiriti of Waitangi, is not the perfect document you would necessarily choose for the decolonisation pathway, but it has become the locus for the journey that the nation's on to try to actually deal with its colonial history. And so it's through the treaty principles, or the treaty, that we have come together as a nation to try to confront that past and try to do something about it. There's also, I think, a future journey we're going to go on, which is going to be very interesting, which is around constitutional reform, and what does that look like, which I think is going to be the step that's going to result, in fact, from David Seymour's attempt to destroy the treaty is going to be the treaty becoming actually entrenched in the Constitution, but that's another story. So there's this, just in terms of the history of Aotearoa New Zealand. The second reason from a purely environmental point is that we, as part of our work, time and again, have formed key alliances with iwi and hapu around the country in order to win environmental battles. You think about the Supreme Court case on deep sea mining. That was one that we did alongside Ngāti Ruanui. There were two grounds we won it on. One was environmental, one was treaty in the Supreme Court. And that's the third reason why we've supported the treaty and opposed the Treaty Principles Bill, is that in our legal work, time and again, the treaty actually, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, has become a bulwark against attempts to destroy the environment. And so for those three reasons, one's kind of like, if you like, just purely from first principles about this country and our history. The second is about looking at, if you like, from a tactical point of view, is that the treaty has formed the framework for our alliance building. So it's not just for our alliance building around our environmental battles. The oil campaign, of course, was another one. But also on the third basis, just from a jurisprudence point of view, time and again, the treaty and the treaty principles have been core to protecting the environment from destruction. There's probably many other reasons why people are opposed to the Treaty Principles Bill, which is a ghastly piece of legislation, but that's certainly three of the core reasons why Greenpeace has taken a stand against it.
Do you want a non-Greenpeace perspective there, Mike?
Oh, no, that's pretty well summarises it. As I mentioned previously, the two major obstacles to extractive industries getting a greater hold on our, is the environmental and indigenous movements. And so, by getting rid of the Treaty of Waitangi, it is about, just dissolving those types of relationships, any legislation that protects Māori flows on through into the environment. And so, Russell summed it up, I'd say, pretty well.
Awesome, thank you. And Elliot, can you remind me of the second part of that? What was the second question from someone else? How do all the small groups work together? Who's taking it? Mike?
Well, I'd suggest that the starting point is that we've got to form agreements on what core objectives are. I think we need to interrogate what are the core objectives of groups, and that find out where the alignments are, and then pull together opportunities to workshop strategy and tactics in regard to that. So it sort of starts off with values propositions, core objectives, what are the strategies to achieve those, and then what sort of tactics are going to be rolled out. That's a simplistic way of looking at it.
And there's lots going on. Like the thing is there's heaps of alliance work going on all the time. I mean, and it happens in all different kind of spaces. So the four biggest environment NGOs, I guess, in Aotearoa, which is like WWF, Forest and Bird, Greenpeace, and Environmental Defence Society, we work together a lot at a kind of dealing with politicians level. So we're often, we go and meet with senior government officials or politicians or both, really. And so, we do a lot of work also where we try to get our submissions aligned. We might share it out. So we go, you write a submission on this one and you write a submission on that, because there's just so much going on. We often divvy out the work amongst those four groups because we just can't cover. This is a full-scale attack on nature we're in the middle of, and we can't do everything. And so we often divvy the work out amongst us. And then there's lots of other groups as well who are doing heaps of work. Like there was the Fast Track Alliance group that you were involved in, Amanda. And so there's lots of different groups like that. Then on seabed mining, there's a whole stack of groups on that, which is another coalition. Then you got like the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, which is a different one, focused on the deep sea. So there's lots of different kinds of groups. You've got all the waste groups all around Aotearoa, who are having to deal with the blasted incineration thing that the government's brought back again. We thought we'd killed off a couple of decades ago. God knows, there's others as well. There's just, so there's lots going on that isn't always visible if you're not in it. And then within that, there's often like lots of working with iwi and hapu. It just depends on the issue by issue, like how it all fits together. And then within, I mean, Mike, you might want to draw out some of the stuff about like the Iwi Chairs Forum and how that works in the different, because that's probably not very visible to a lot of people from outside about how that kind of works. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Well, just before that, I think, one of the things that's come out of this discussion is just how critical the situation is getting now. The acceleration of the climate crisis at both speed and scale, the rise of the fascism around the globe and how that's playing out here. So I've got a question to us, and everybody here actually is, what does changing the gears look like? We've all been doing what we've been doing. for the last little while, but the environment that we're working in has changed a gear. So what does it look like when we step out of our practice, and what does that gear change look like? That's what I'm interested in. Because I think we've, like you said, Russell, we've got to go hard. This is the moment. This is the moment. Over the next couple of years is going to be determine how things go out into the future. And in the political cycles too, I think this is the time to go hard before another election, you know, as not as a goal or an outcome necessarily, but as a strategy towards it, thinking past that. Yeah, but so what does that change of gears look like? If we were to accelerate our practice, what does that look like? And what are the limits to that? And who's going to do what? I'm quite interested in that. So I don't know if you've got any ideas about that, Amanda.
I need to think about that one. Do you have any thoughts, Niamh?
Not that really answer it in a way that fixes anything, but I think there's something about like being as brave as you can with whatever you've got, and for all of us that's slightly different from where we start. And so I think it's about like all of us taking it to the level that's brave and safe for us. And sometimes things aren't safe in activism, and that means something different to all of us depending on who we are and where we sit in this as well. But I really agree, it's time for all of us to think like, how can we step this up ourselves too?
My 2 cents is I reckon there's got to be more collaboration between the social movements and the environment movements. So, like in the environment space, we've done a lot of work. We've done a lot of work to try to build relationships between the different environment NGOs. It may not always be obvious from the outside, but actually, like just even those 4, we talk together a lot now, much more so than we did before. And then at other levels as well, there's lots more collaboration going on than there probably was 10 years ago. But what there really isn't a lot of organised collaboration going on is between the different kind of social movements, particularly the unions. Remember, the unions, 360,000 people. It's the biggest democratic institution in the country. Unions in the past have been critical to protecting democracy from fascism, right? I mean, it was the unions that were really important to it. So I do think that we probably need to be a bit more proactive about making that bridge, and that's the next step that I can see. I can't necessarily see after that, but I think that's probably something that we should be trying to do, is to look at that common ground as our next big challenge. And I think this is the year to do it. You think about, I don't know if you saw that story in the paper today or whatever it was, the CTU, which is like the Council of Trade Unions, represents, you know, the 300,000+ unionists there, the employment minister, Brooke Van whatever her name is, she won't even meet with them, right? It's unbelievable, unheard of, right? You know, this is, well, that is kind of, I don't want to say that she's a fascist because that's not really right, but I mean, that is the kind of thing that fascist organisations believe. They don't think they should meet with trade unions just on principle. They just don't think they're legitimate organisations. But trade unions are like, they have been the bulwark against, you know, to protect democracy over many generations. I mean, you think, go back to 1832 and the first Reform Act, you know, which expanded the franchise, and back in the Great Britain, the unions were critical to that. So I do think there's a place for the environment movement and the broader workers movement, or social movements more generally, not just trade unions, to actually try to talk more about their shared problem and shared solutions.
I've had a chance to think about your question now. One thing that I think we all need to do, everyone in this room, is to try and make our movement feel as welcoming as possible. One of the things that I often hear from people is they feel like they aren't, radical enough to be part of Greenpeace. They're not a vegan, or they don't want to get arrested or whatever it is, and it feels like the kind of barriers to entry are often really high. And the time it takes for people to go on that journey is long. Like I come from a very politically conservative family that does not like sticking its neck out at all, and it took me 10 years to be comfortable with the idea of direct action and getting arrested. I mean, Niamh remembers 10 years ago when I got ulcers before actions because I just found it so terrifying, you know. And there's a lot of people who really care but think that this whole taking action thing is somehow an exclusive club that's only for the really extreme people. And I think we need to make it a more welcoming space for people to take time to get there. And similar to what Russell was saying about like the whole purity thing, we need to, accept people where they're at and bring them along. And it's kind of wild when you think about the coalition government that we have. We've got ACT and New Zealand First in a coalition together, and they couldn't be philosophically more different in some ways, but they've found common ground on certain things, and they are willing to set aside their differences to make the change happen. And I think we all need to do that as a movement as well. Give each other some grace, trust each other's intentions, and get on with the job.
Well said. Calling for the last question of the night. Okay. I'm sorry. Elliot in the middle. We need to number you off.
I have never been in a room with 3 Elliots either, I have to say. It's terrifying. I'd like to disagree with something you said a bit earlier, Niamh, which is that we need to just get out there and do things and not necessarily believing in kind of activist schools. I think we're in this country is quite depoliticized, or at least up until recently has been for a long time. I think we need to collectively educate ourselves and each other, and that is really key because we can't change the world unless we understand it. So I think we need both education and action. Like those two things are inseparable as well.
Yes, I also agree with you on that. I think my point is people don't have to wait until they've got it right or perfect or have to learn something before they can start. But I absolutely agree with you that we should be learning from our elders in the movement, and our elders aren't always the people that are older than us. So I wholeheartedly agree with your disagreement. See, we can agree to disagree. That we just stopped division in the movement just then. Look at us go. All right. Any further questions? Are we done?
I haven't got a question, but I want to put in a plug on unions.
Plug on unions. We're going to give you a microphone 1 second to keep the people on Zoom in the loop.
There are 2 presentations online at the Fabian Society. One is from Craig Rennie, who is the CTU economist. It's about how similar the economic policies of the Labour Party and the National Party actually are. And the other is a man called Van Jackson, who talks about the geopolitical situation of the world before the recent presidential election. Both of those addresses, which are available online at the Fabian Society, Van Jackson and Craig Rennie, are mind-expanding. And they fit in with exactly what you were saying.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you so much to everyone who has been joining us on Zoom. I know it's really tricky when you can't always hear what's going on or see what's going on, but thanks for your patience with us and hope that it's been fun for you as it has been for us. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us in the room. It's slightly terrifying to not be able to see you, but know you're there. It's like the climate crisis. The methane crisis, yeah, absolutely. But we've really enjoyed being here with you, and really thank you for coming out and spending your Tuesday, what day are we? Tuesday evening with us. And acknowledge that there's heaps of you in the room who are already doing heaps for this beautiful planet, so thank you for all the work that you all do out there. And huge thank you to you 3. You are all wildly inspirational, well-spoken, very brave individuals, so appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us. And speaking of movement elders, these 3 love your questions, so hit them up afterwards. Thank you so much. That was Greenpeace Live.